service dominant logic or the service logic or however you call it. And I hope you already feel the wind of change. The wind of change behind the big change. I think there is a big change which is even bigger than the SDL, the service dominant logic. And I look from this bigger perspective onto the service dominant logic as an indicator for this bigger change. So what I'm going to do is, well, even if that is more simple for you, where we are and where we go, an option. It's an option. You could also think that I'm offering you some sizzling noises and you make words out of it. That means that you're responsible for what you hear and I'm responsible for what I'm saying. So keep that in mind, please. So this is 4 steps to go. The first step is how we see. You might think, well, it's quite clear. We see what there is and I will show you what you see. The next question is, how do we use language? So this is an introduction into social constructionism, these first steps. And then I ask, of course, what does it have to do with service dominant logic? I will show you. And then, is there anything we can conclude with? And definitely I will conclude with something. And the most important term, and my most liked term, is the term coordination. And I come to that back. Okay. Well, we typically think that we have objects, and if researchers use the same research method, they come up with the same knowledge, okay? That is a very positivistic perspective, and things are there. This is definitely a bottle, and whatever we think about, that is the perspective. But now look at that. You can easily identify that and that, but what's about that? You may have problems with that. If you're not, that would surprise me. Why do we have problems to see that? Well, it could be easy if we would see with our eyes, but we don't see with our eyes. You know that from the Kleine Prinz already. There was already mentioned that you really see the important things with your heart and not with your eyes. But I tell you something different. You don't see with your heart. Why we are not able to see that? There are some lines and some dots, but we don't see this as a 2-dimensional surface. We interpret it as a 3-dimensional thing, as a 3-dimensional object. And we do so because we have only experienced 3 dimensions. We have never, none of us have experiences with 2-dimensional surfaces. We are 3-dimensional people, and so far we experience 3-dimensional things, and so far we see that as a 3-dimensional object. But it isn't. That is, remember the wonderful picture where you see a pipe and there is the written title, "This is not a pipe." Think about that again, if you see it. So the next question is, what do you see here? It's co-creating value, co-creating insights here. So what do you see? What? A dancing pair, okay. Something else? Nothing. You don't see anything. Wow. Open up your eyes, please. You can see whatever you want. They strike a pose. They are dancing. They look tired. Whatever. They are not happy. They are happy. They are red. They are black. They are white. Whatever you see, is that a description of the picture? No. We use the picture to describe our thoughts, feelings, etc. By using words we have learned from other people. So we only describe our past experiences we might have had with dancing. I come back to dance a little bit more. Now, now this is a nice experiment these neuroscientists have made with dancers. So they have made 2 groups of dancers, one ballet dancer, and the other group were capoeira dancer. So capoeira is a fight dance in South America. And these 2 groups, and another group, so people like we, no dancer. There might be some who are dancers, but I'm not a dancer in that sense. So experienced ballet dancer, experienced capoeira dancer, and experienced no dancer. And they have shown two short, well, how can I get that? No. Okay, these 2 sequences. This is one, and this is the second one. And during the perception of these two sequences, they looked into the brain with these new technologies. And there is what comes up. Look at that. These are the activities, the green one are the activities as if a ballet dancer saw the ballet sequence. This green is if a capoeira dancer saw the capoeira dancing. The yellow ones are a cross if a ballet dancer saw a capoeira dancer and a capoeira dancer saw a ballet dancer. Which means that is activity in the brain. So that is not what you see, that is in your brain. It happens in your brain. Well, maybe in your brain and in my brain, this happens only. Because we are not experienced in dancing. So we don't see with our eyes. Definitely not. We see with our experience. So that is my first point here. We don't see with our eyes, we see with our experience. Okay? Next point. The problem here is very often that we don't see that we don't see. But that's another point. So I try to make it a little bit more formula. If they dance, they do something, a person gets experience, and this changes the perceptions. So this is a process. I come to that back. So if that is the case, then everything is different for everybody, which means everything is subjective. If there is no objectivity, if everything is subjective, that was the idea of constructivism. That means everybody is alone. We have no idea to get in touch with others, which can't not be the case. We know that we do sometimes understand each other, sometimes. But this is enough to know it. So it can't be the case that everything is subjective. So this is a subject perspective, constructivism. And it shows that people construe or perceive the object differently, even if they use the same method, we don't know, and they get different knowledge. There's no way of understanding. That is what the Greeks called solipsism, okay? For those who know that. Now we put two people together, because we know that we understand each other. Okay? So now, if we interact, we typically describe our interaction, or we typically speak with each other. But if you remember dancing, sometimes you don't even speak with one another, depending on the dance, on the affair you have between the dancers, and so on. But the point is, as soon as we speak, we do something with our experience. And what we do with our experience, we just put it into a form. And this form we call information. So information is nothing else but an experience having been put into a form. So language are forms. And I think I now got the idea that property rights also forms to coordinate market processes or practices. So now we can use the language or the forms to coordinate our behavior. If I would ask you, please give me the flyer, that is coordination of behavior, and it works. If I would say, please give me the lalabulu, you would, yeah, exactly. It looks a little bit strange because he doesn't understand what I mean by lalabulu. And there is no common meaning of lalabulu. Because we have to create the meaning of the lalabulu, and we typically do it by the use of language. So there is another coordination, which is the language used to explain the meaning of the language. So we use words to explain the meaning of other words. And that means we coordinate the meaning of the words we use by the language or by the coordination process of creating language. Okay, so we can say we have two coordination processes. We coordinate the interactions or the processes or the practices, and we do it by language use, which I typically would call forms, but we can create new forms and change other forms by coordinating these forms by using language. Okay, now I give you this. Think about this. Who is for A? Who is for B? Who is for B? Oh, that's great. I love that. Who is for A? Who's mathematician? Okay. The mathematician would tell you, well, look at that from a logical point. It is quite clear that Linda as a bank teller includes Linda as a bank teller and an active feminist. Logically, it's quite clear. But, wow, does it mean that we are so illogical? No, it does mean something different from my perspective. So if you vote for A, you are thinking quite logically. If you vote for B, you are thinking about the question. And you think, well, if the question has any sense, then it must be the sense that this Linda is not an active feminist. And that is what you implicitly assumed for alternative A, and therefore votes for alternative B. Because you, friendly enough as you are, says, well, this professor doesn't bore us with stupid questions. There must be some sense in that question. The sense is, well, we had some implicit assumption here. But we did it very implicitly, and that is what we usually do by using language. Okay, this is a nice statement I found, and since I have not very much time to let you guess who that was. Minus 20, exactly. Minus 20 minutes. So this is really interesting, because think about that. We learn language by others, and we can only verify our language use with others. We have no way to verify language use alone. So, and this was Niels Bohr, by the way, who was definitely not a social constructionist, but was very aware of the net of language use. And you all know from Wittgenstein, Ludwig Wittgenstein, that he had some same idea. So, language is neither objective nor subjective, and so on and so on. It's quite clear. Language is a way of coordinating behavior and coordinating the language itself. So that is the reason why I talk about coordination. Now, you see the third perspective. All these objectives, the researchers, are created by the use of language. If we call someone a researcher, we have somehow an idea of this term because it was somewhere introduced with some other things. Otherwise you wouldn't have, you have seen researchers. If you wouldn't have seen them, if you wouldn't have heard in the net of language use, you wouldn't know what a researcher is. And so with the other terms, so this is socially constructed. This is a very brief introduction. If you want to have a longer one, I have a DVD outside where I give the idea of social constructionism and the perspective from social constructivism on SDL on, I think, more than 1 hour in German outside on a DVD. You can take that. So these are the 3 perspectives. Now, I took the 10 premises, fundamental premises of service domain logic, and looked, well, is it objective orientation, subjective orientation, or is it an intersubjective orientation? And to make this short, you see, we could discuss it, we could discuss all the details, but I said, just believe me. You have no chance now. Just believe me. You can question everything when I'm on the podium. So the most crosses are in that space, and so I think that is the reason why I like service domain logic. It is the most intersubjective approach in marketing we have. And therefore, it is, from my perspective, the best approach we can ever have. So now, SD logic is mainly intersubjective. Social constructionism is by definition intersubjective. SC, social constructionism, sees language as the coordination of behavior and meaning. Why not taking coordination of behavior and meaning as the driving concept for extending the SD logic towards a theory of market and marketing? But, so we could put it this way. So this is the social constructionist perspective, and we have coordination and meaning, which are driving forces for everybody. If you have no idea what it means, if you have no idea of how to coordinate yourself with others, you are lost. But now, half a year ago, I would have stopped with this slide. But now I go further and ask you, what is meaning? And I found very interesting neuroscientists' research on that. So look at that first. Something for the Germans as well as for the English people, speaking people. Isn't that interesting? Who can read it? Who can't? Okay. Okay, yeah, I guess I come to your back. That's a good point. So I'm a dyslexic. I have no problems in reading that. Now, there's a machine on the internet. This is a part of your article, Steve, which I put into that machine, changing it and flipping it around, and you can still read it. So don't go through it. The quintessence of that is, the more experienced we are, the more nonsense we can read. So you're not very experienced in our language, so yeah, you cannot read this nonsense. That's quite good for you. So now we go further. So this is a result of a neuroscientist research. And that is very interesting because this leads me to another consequence. What they say is that even if we perceive whatever we perceive, we have an activation in the sensory motor system. Well, that is a part of the brain, to make a long story short, the part of the brain where the motor control is prepared, so whatever we do is prepared and executed. That is the sensomotor system. And we go further. Idiom meaning. So it's not only I'm in a box saying, well, I feel that I'm inside something. It's also that even semantic aspects, grounded in action, perception, knowledge, must play a critical role in the composition process idiom meaning. So that means wherever we think about meaning, it is based on our motor activities. We are in this room. He fell in love. That is emotion. He fell into something, which we call love. I go further with that. But look at that. The motor cortex contributes specifically to speech perception. So whatever I produce here, you reconstruct according to your experience of your embodied neurosystem. That is an interesting experiment they did. So they simulated, they activated some parts of the brain, motor parts of the brain, and they showed letters and words to the people, and the activation of the motor part of the brain changed totally the perception of the words. So the motor part of the brain is responsible for your perception of words, which is, I think, really a challenge. And this is quite new. So this is about an investigation. So this is a condensed version of these findings. These findings show that recognition relies on sensomotor coordination. Again, coordination. So what your motor brain does is what the words mean for you, which is really an interesting sense. This is Lakoff and Johnson with their wonderful book, Philosophy in the Flesh. Philosophy in the flesh, huh? Well, I would agree, meaning in the flesh. Meaning is in the flesh, it's embodied. And they give a lot of examples, I'll show you some of them. States allocation, he is in love. She is a close friend. He's out of control, or it's out of control. And they say changes are movements. She fell into a depression. He went crazy. And. You can add hundreds of these examples, figuring out that we use metaphors and that we live by these metaphors, which are based in the enactment we do and we have experienced. So for me, no word has any meaning. I just use the words for coordination. And if you agree on the result of the coordination, everything is fine. Think a second on misunderstandings. When are we aware that we have misunderstood each other? Typically, when a coordination process failed. We are not aware of a misunderstanding when the coordination process has not finished. But after the coordination process has finished and it was not successful, we call it a misunderstanding. So understanding on the other side is about successful coordination. So in that sense, I would add here, why not taking the coordination of behavior and language use as the driving concept for standing and so on, making this thing. And I would say, well, if we think about markets as forms coordinating practices, then we have an idea of what is the wind of change telling to us. Thank you very much.